Ladies and gentlemen, we have a moron who goes by the YouTube handle TMM. Who is this guy? I don't know who he is or what he is. But he has done a video called Evolution and Ayn Rand. And he is displaying his IQ almost every sentence. It's a very low bar he has to jump over to display his IQ.
I find it strange that Ayn Rand was skeptical of the theory of evolution.
Ayn Rand was not skeptical of the theory of evolution. Ayn Rand said that she was not a specialist on the theory of evolution. Ayn Rand did not have a view. She did not have an opinion on the theory of evolution. Now, I'm slightly annoyed by that because it's quite a powerful theory. We can do quite a lot with it, and there are implications for organization and so on. It's a very good, powerful theory. Why was she not aware of it? Well, let's remember that Ayn Rand built her philosophy because she needed it. The world needed it. She had to do it. She didn't want to. She said she wished there were an Aristotle around in her lifetime that she could look up to and follow. So you can't ask for everything from Ayn Rand. She did enough, goddammit. Okay? So she wasn't a specialist on the theory of evolution, all right? I don't know if she read Darwin's theory of evolution or not. I don't know that much. But she did not doubt the theory of evolution. She just wasn't a specialist on it, and she was a theoretical thinker, and that to her seemed like technical science, and it did not seem like something that she needed to be involved in. So she did not. So he starts right off by saying something that is utterly not true.
You may find it strange that Ayn Rand was skeptical of the theory of evolution.
You fucking moron. She was not skeptical of the theory of evolution. Can I turn this up any? Let me see here. We are at maximum. Alright.
As one of her devotees and eventual fuck buddies once wrote, I remember being astonished to hear her say one day, "After all, the theory of evolution is only a hypothesis." I asked her, "You mean you seriously doubt that more complex life forms, including humans, evolved from less complex life forms?" She shrugged and responded, "I'm really not prepared to say."
So, if you want to take Nathaniel Brandon's word for it, that would be fine. But he says that she shrugged and said, "I'm really not prepared to say." So it was a technical issue as far as she was concerned. Now, I do not view it as a technical issue. I view it as a highly, highly philosophical issue. I believe the implications that evolution has for us are highly philosophical. But I view it that way after all of the stuff done in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Richard Dawkins' writings on the selfish gene and stuff, which this guy is obviously aware of. He knows all about the selfish gene. In fact, it really colors his whole thing here. I don't think he mentioned Dawkins or the selfish gene one time. Maybe he did. We'll see.
To that effect. I do not mean to imply that she wanted to substitute for the theory of evolution the religious belief that we are all God's creation, but there was definitely something about the concept of evolution that made her uncomfortable.
It's pretty tenuous. There was something about the concept of evolution that made her uncomfortable. That's a judgment of her feelings, and I think that's a ridiculous thing to say. All that we have evidence for, you people that always like to harp on, what's your evidence? What's your evidence? All that we have evidence for is that she is not a thinker on that particular subject. She's just not into it. She's indifferent to it.
I don't think this should be particularly surprising when you look at the foundations of objectivist morality, because they are essentially based on a flawed understanding of biology.
A flawed understanding of biology. Now, Ayn Rand's ethics are based on the idea that you have a choice to exist or not to exist. Now, how is that a flawed understanding of biology? Well, he says that the reason we exist is to reproduce. Right? Now I have a little poem that we're going to get to in a minute. It's very short, heroic couplet. But it's like, listen, buddy, these thoughts have occurred to objectivists, and it's not a stumbling block for objectivism or for her ethics. It's just a piece of reality, and it fits just fine into her ethics, which are objective and fit right in with reality. So let's go forward and hear what he has to say.
The virtue of selfishness, she says, there's only one fundamental alternative in the universe, existence or non-existence, and it pertains to a single class of entities.
Correct. That's correct. There's only, either you exist or you don't exist. And it pertains to a single class of entities, living entities. That's true. Now I skip a bit because he just quotes Ayn Rand at length, and I want to make a point here about that. Here we are watching people who dislike Ayn Rand and are trying their best to do anything they can to knock her off of her feet, and they have to quote her, and they quote things that are beautiful, well-written, elegantly reasoned, substantive, and they're spreading these quotes all around. So I just wanted to point out the silver lining in the cloud. If anybody with half a brain watches his videos, they'll be able to figure out something reasonable. The people with extremely low IQ, his friends and so on, will be maybe fooled by it.
Life. This, of course, is a gross oversimplification of...
Alright, so it's a gross oversimplification to say that an individual lives for himself. Why? Because the individual actually is just carrying the genes to reproduce. Okay? Now he is dropping here, for objectivists, you'll understand this. Everybody else can listen in if you like. He's dropping the context of what it means to be alive. To be alive, you wake up in the morning, you do things that preserve your life, and you go to bed at night. Why do you go to bed? Because sleep helps you preserve yourself as well. And so it's a cycle of things that preserve yourself. Now somewhere during that, you do have a little mechanism in your brain that gets reward triggered when you do things that help procreation. You also are quite fond of procreative activities. But mostly you spend most of your time surviving. Almost all your time you spend surviving, figuring out how to survive and taking those actions. So that's the context in which ethics is a science. Ethics exists as a practice, as a domain, inside the context of an individual that wakes up every morning and has to do something to stay alive. He says ethics can all be thrown out. Ayn Rand's ethics can all be thrown out because the individual wouldn't exist unless its genes came from somewhere, and it has no reason to exist unless its genes are going to be going somewhere. Well, can you see that that is just not a substantive way to argue against it? So on what would we base ethics then? On the fact that at one point in that individual's life or more, it's going to procreate and send its genes on? Should that be the basis of ethics? And in what way? You see, ethics is meant to preserve the individual's life. Ayn Rand says you can choose to exist or not to exist. So if you re-geared ethics because of genes or something, then what would it be? Is it for the race? Is it for the group? So this is some sort of collectivism. Is that what we're going to see?
These physiological processes do not direct themselves at the single goal of preserving that one individual organism's life. They are directed more fundamentally at the preservation and proliferation of genes. Yes, they do.
Alright, so he says you've got lots of activities going on in your body, and they're mostly for preserving your genes. They don't really care about you and your life. Now, I have a little poem about this, because this is true. It occurred to me. Now, that doesn't really have any implications for you in your life. You could take note of it and wrestle with it, but it's just a fact. So here's my little poem. And this poem occurs to me, sorry, I will say a couple more introductory sentences. This poem occurred to me, I needed to write such a poem because I broke up with this young lady, it was 18 years ago, and there was this great, great sadness. And I thought, well, of course there would be, because my ancestors, who were successful at procreating, had a very strong connection and bond with their mate. If I would have had ancestors who were just willy-nilly, could walk away from their mates very easily, then I wouldn't be alive. I would not have had ancestors. The only reason I had ancestors is because of strong bonds between the mating pairs. So of course I feel a strong bond in this way to this girl. So that helped me understand it and get over it a little bit, and understand that Why do I have such a strong emotion? I wouldn't exist unless these strong emotions existed. These just are what have delivered me to this world. So it didn't really help me stop the emotion from occurring. It just helped me take less metaphysical significance from the emotion, or put less metaphysical significance into the emotion. So here's the poem. If happiness is difficult obtained, recall the reason humans are so strained. As Darwin pointed out, we are evolved to reproduce. No further problem solved. Okay? There. An objectivist can take note of evolution. It doesn't concern anything with our ethics, changes our ethics in no way, and makes us take no exception to our ethics. In what way would we rebuild ethics to take note of the fact that genes are what drive our existence? Do genes really drive our existence? They certainly didn't drive Ayn Rand's. I mean, she never had any children, and she wrote a philosophy. Now, if genes drove her existence, then there would be a lot more people writing objectivism, because a lot of people share her genes. So it's clear that genes don't drive your existence. So, should ethics be based on our genes and what our genes are trying to do? That's his claim. And in what way would they do that? So the fact that an individual exists for himself is irrelevant to ethics. Then what would ethics be for? Then what would ethics even be? Is it for the group? The group doesn't exist. Only individuals exist. So let's see what else. Yes.
Keep the organism alive, but they only keep the organism alive because it needs to be alive to reproduce. None of these physiological processes would exist without...
Yes, your genes have only kept you alive because of reproduction. Reproduction is the backbone on which all humanity exists. Shakespeare said, if we quit having babies, 60 more years would make the world away. Right? Well, we can maybe say 90 years now or whatever. Babies born today would live for 60 to 90 years, and then the universe would just blink out of existence as far as humans are concerned. True. Why does that have any implications for ethics, though? I mean, you could say that ethically you should reproduce, but you don't have very good grounds to stand on, because what does that have to do with any given individual's life? You can say that you should reproduce if it makes you happy. Now you're getting somewhere, because that would increase the value of the individual's life to that individual. One thing that he misses here, he's losing sight of the fact that individuals exist at all, isn't he? So why does that individual entity exist? He says because of the genes. Well, why do the genes exist? Blank out. The genes just exist. Actually, we could look at it the other way, couldn't we? We could say the genes exist. Why? In order to produce individuals. You see? And it does. It produces a chain of individuals over time. So now we look at it just the opposite way that he looks at it. Individuals exist, but why? Because of genes. Therefore, blank out on the individuals. We say individuals exist because genes, but the individuals are what exist. Genes are inside of them. Genes are incidental to you in your daily life, right? You don't go around saying, oh, about my genes now. You don't get out of bed in the morning and say, oh, my genes. Right? You get out of the bed and you say, I'll have a bit of toast and something. Now you say, oh, your genes are what make you like orange juice. So you're just satisfying your genes when you eat breakfast. Okay? So you're just walking genes then. What is it? A package of walking genes. What do we call that? Blank out. We don't know. What is it? It's an individual. So when we look at it the opposite way, we say the individual exists. Sure, he exists because genes have brought him here. But what is he? He's an individual. Where were these other genes? They were in other individuals. You see, the only thing that really exists here is individuals. If ethics is going to consider anything at all, it's going to have to consider the things that exist, namely individuals. Abstractly, you can notice over time that genes exist, But that's not really relevant to you on your daily life. And if you don't have kids yourself, it doesn't matter to you. You still have to preserve your life and stop yourself from suffering and make sure that you're happy and feel comfortable and enjoy your days. Even if you don't reproduce, you have to do these things. So your genes are really irrelevant to the issue of how you live your life and why. Or they're incidental. He, because he's a collectivist and a Kantian of some kind, simply reverses that right around, doesn't he? He says you as an individual are irrelevant because you have genes. Now, why would that follow? It doesn't. It's simply utter garbage nonsense, but it's the only way that he can see the subject, because he's a screwed up, idiot Kantian with very, very low IQ.
Reproduction. As far as your physiology and the genes responsible for that physiology are concerned, you live, first and foremost, to make babies. Rand herself never had kids, of course.
You live, first and foremost, to make babies as far as your physiology is concerned. No, that's the whole point about ethics. You choose why to live. Evolution has dropped you off here. It's abandoned you, really. It really has abandoned you. Evolution just pops these things out, and it writes instructions in them, and these things go do as the instructions say. Now, some of these things are really advanced, and they have volition. Your cat has volition. Have you ever seen your cat exercise volition when it goes up to look at the food bowl and decides not to eat and walks away? That's funny, isn't it? It wasn't volition. It was caused by something. That's determinism. All right, let's not get off onto that.
Couldn't have tolerated them. And her attitude toward reproduction was this: the mere fact that man has the capacity to kill does not mean that it is his duty to become a murderer.
Right. You choose the purpose of your life. You choose the purpose of your life. You've been abandoned here by evolution. It just dumped you off. If happiness is difficult obtained, recall the reason humans are so strained. As Darwin pointed out, we are evolved to reproduce. No further problem solved, right? We haven't reproduced in order to be magnificent gods that are omniscient or omnipotent or something. We've reproduced in order that we may reproduce again. We are obsessed with the beauty of females. Right? Men are. Wait a minute. Women are too. Why are women also obsessed with the beauty of females? Because females are the important thing for reproduction. We could kill 90% of men tomorrow, and the race would go on. The human race would continue. We could kill 90% of females tomorrow, and the human race would be destroyed. It would be significantly set back. Right? Significantly set back. For centuries. Centuries. Maybe forever. It might even destroy it, because we might not have the critical mass of people to solve problems. But if you take 90% of men and kill them, then the other 10% will be busy. So men, not important. Women are extremely important. Therefore, men have evolved to view women as extraordinarily beautiful creatures. And women have evolved to beautify themselves and to view each other as very beautiful. Women are not obsessed with men as beautiful creatures. Of course, men are attractive, and women view men as beautiful in certain contexts. Women also view women as beautiful. Men do not view men as beautiful. Men do not look at other men and say, "Oh, he's hot. I'm not gay, but damn, he's hot." That just doesn't happen. But it happens with women, because women are epically important to our genes, to our species, to our survival. Now, I can notice that fact, and then I can write a little poem about it, and yet I am still an orphan of evolution. I've been dropped off here. I may or may not reproduce in my life. I do have a daughter, but it's not necessary. It's not preconditioned. It's not written in my genes. It's not the only thing I'm going to do. It's not like I'm a single-celled amoeba, which when I get fatter, I'll split in two. That would be more to his point, wouldn't it? He wants an ethics for single-celled amoeba, doesn't he? He wants an ethics that is dictated by the fact that your genes have brought you here, your genes are dictating what you do every second, and your genes will see you out the door into your next form. He wants single-celled amoeba that get fatter and fatter and fatter and then split into two. That would be an ethical theory that would be appropriate for his level, his ability to think, his level of functioning.
The same way, the mere fact that a man has the capacity to procreate does not mean that it is his duty to commit spiritual suicide by making procreation his primary goal and turning himself into a stud farm animal. And I actually agree with her on this. But I agree with her on this because I do not believe...
So he agrees with her, but he comes to it with the wrong reason. So you may have seen my post to Anoop Verma, where I went over having the right reason for the wrong having the right conclusion for the wrong reason is actually the wrong conclusion. So he has reached the same conclusion as Ayn Rand, that we don't have a duty to reproduce like farmyard animals, but he's reached it in a different way.
That the facts of biology can be used to justify any particular moral position. I think morality is a lot more complicated than that.
There's his position. So she has identified that morality is based on a single choice to exist or not. And morality concerns a single group of entities, living entities. And his position is that morality is a lot more complicated than that. Well, that's a very sophisticated position you've staked out for yourself.
I don't believe that the ability to reproduce means that one ought to, but I also don't believe that the ability to survive means that one ought to.
He does not believe that the ability to survive means that you ought to survive. Well, nowhere in Ayn Rand's ethics does she say that because you survive, because you exist means you ought to survive. She doesn't say that. She says, if you choose to survive. She harps on this. She harps on volition. Man is a being of volitional choice. He can choose whether to think and focus his mind or not. He can choose whether to survive or not. He can choose what to do with his mind. So, it is not true. You're attacking a straw man and a useless straw man and a weak straw man. She does not say that it is your duty to survive because you exist. That would be a very, very different ethic. She says, if you want to survive, then the only method to do so is to use reason. If you choose to survive, you must use reason to preserve your life. That is Ayn Rand's ethics. Now see, he can't even get on to the reason bit. He's just saying, if you exist, then you should choose to survive. That's not what Ayn Rand's ethics says at all. It says, if you do choose to survive, you have to use reason. That's Ayn Rand's ethics. So he doesn't even understand it on even the most introductory level.
This is a non sequitur. Now, I desire to live as much as Ayn Rand desired to live, but the mere fact that I am alive is not what justifies that desire.
She is not trying to justify the individual's life. She's not saying that the individual's existence is justified because he exists. That would be stupid. She's saying that the individual, if the individual wants to continue existing, is going to have to take specific actions in reality to preserve his life. That's her claim. You're talking right past Ayn Rand. You're not even addressing anything about the ethics or any points that Ayn Rand made. You're not remotely near the target. And you're displaying your IQ, you goddamn moron.
Something is does not determine how it ought to be. Ayn Rand, however, believed the fact that a living entity is determines what it ought to do.
Yes. Like a thorn bush, let's say. This is where they get really confused. There is a thorn bush. You had ought to go around it. Why should you go around it? Ayn Rand says, because you're a living entity. And he says, what if I want to die? So Ayn Rand's simply saying, if you choose to live. She's not saying you're going to choose to live. She says, if you choose to live. So is does follow from an ought, but she's only talking to the people who are choosing to live. Okay? It is a thorn bush. I value life. Therefore, I ought to go around the thorn bush. And he gets confused because we value life. And he says, is doesn't follow from an ought. What if the thorn bush, whatever, blah, and his head blows up because he's a fucking moron.
Much for the issue of the relation between is and ought. But the whole reason any organism is, the whole reason it exists, is because of reproduction.
Do you mean the reason that it exists is because of reproduction? In what way do you mean that sentence? Do you mean the purpose of my life is reproduction? Or do you mean that I exist as a result of reproduction? Because that sentence could mean either thing. You said the reason a person exists is because of reproduction. They are a result of reproduction, sure. Is that why my dad existed? No, I'm just one of the things that he produced. Is that why my grandpa existed? No, I'm just one of the things that he produced. Do I exist in order to reproduce? No, it's just one of the things I might do. Do I exist only because reproduction happened? Yes. All right. What does that prove about what I should do with my life now that I'm alive, though? That has no implications for me and my life now that I'm alive. Unless it brings me joy or happiness to reproduce the next generation, there's no answer for why I should, unless I'm just my genes and I'm no longer an individual. He's a Kantian. He's a collectivist Kantian, and his ethics would supplant the idea that you should choose what to do with your own life. He's on a very slippery slope to an ethics that would say you should not choose what to do with your own life. You should, and who knows what rationalization he would get to if he developed this theory fully.
Organisms are the way they are, and they function the way they function, not because these functions facilitate survival per se. They facilitate survival only because survival facilitates reproduction. So while I don't think you can morally justify anything by simply pointing to biology, if you're going to say that your morality is objectively correct because it's based in the facts of biology, you should probably first try to understand what those facts actually are.
So he finishes off the video by saying that Ayn Rand did not understand the facts of biology. He did not. He didn't point out anything about biology she didn't understand. So try again, bonehead. Oh, TMM. Who is he? Did he make more videos I should worry about? What a moron. Somebody let him know.